You're listening to the Powers Podcast with your host, Noah Powers.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Powers Podcast, Episode 5. I'm your host, Noah freaking Powers. Before I get started today, I just want to say I went through and did this entire podcast and forgot to hit the record button. So you guys are getting a rehearsed podcast. Hopefully that'll make it a little bit better, but, we'll see, I guess. But yeah, before I jump into my topic for today, if anyone saw the Carolina-Miami game last night, it was a nail-biter. The final moments of the game, Joel Berry hits a three-pointer with 4.1 seconds left to tie the game at 88 all. Now, you would think overtime, right? Well, hang on a second. Miami inbounds, and Jaquan Newton dribbles down court, and at the buzzer, he hits a dagger from half court to win the game for the Hurricanes, 91-88. Now, as a Carolina fan myself, as you can imagine, I was pretty heartbroken. But that being said, I can't even begin to imagine the way Joel Berry and Theo Pinson felt losing in that fashion on their senior night, their last game in the Dean Smith Center. It was really sad to watch. But that didn't stop them from giving amazing senior speeches. I just went back through and watched the senior speeches, and I'm not going to lie, I got a little misty-eyed. There's so much emotion packed into them, and anytime I watch senior speeches, it's hard to not get a little bit emotional because, it's their farewell, it's their goodbye. And Coach Williams got up there and he said a few things. And it was just the fact that these guys were able to bring one another up after a tough loss like that and still go out there and make everyone in attendance laugh and smile. It's one of those things where it's like you can really see the family aspect, and it's just one of those beautiful things. And it's, as a fan of college basketball, not as a fan of Carolina basketball, as a fan of basketball in general, I feel like every team should strive to have that family connection. Because if you're a team, you should play as a team, but you should also play as a family. But yeah, guys, that's my little spiel about the Carolina game last night and the senior speeches and all that. But now, on to my topic for today. I'm going to be discussing the apparent fall of the Oklahoma Sooners men's basketball team. Now, Oklahoma started out this season with a 10-1 record, and then Big 12 play started. And since the start of conference play against TCU on December 30th, the Sooners have been in somewhat of a funk that they're having trouble shaking. They started out conference play with a pair of wins over TCU and OK State, and since then, the Sooners have lost 11 of 16. Oklahoma currently holds a 17-12 record with a 7-10 conference record. And Joe Lunardi from ESPN's Bracketology doesn't believe that a fall from the bracket is too far-fetched if Oklahoma doesn't get it together. The most recent update of the bracket has the Sooners in a 10th seed spot playing Houston in the first round in the West region. So, what exactly is the issue with Oklahoma? Well, certain people may not feel this way, but I think we've got another case of Oklahoma relying too much on one player. They made this same mistake when in 2015-16, Buddy Hield was their go-to, and nobody statistically could fill the gigantic shoes that Hield wore, points-wise at least. Hield in the 2015-16 season averaged 25 points a game. He was followed by a modest 13 points a game by Jordan Woodard and 12.6 by Isaiah Cousins. Now, in retrospect, 13 points a game and 12.6 points a game are great statistics. But when you're following a player who's throwing down a quarter century every game, your team is depending on one player. That's just how it is. And Oklahoma's making the same mistake this season. Christian James and Brady Manick are putting up 12.4 points a game and 10.4 points a game, respectively, which, again, are great stats. But Trae Young is throwing up 28 points a game. So don't try and tell me that the Sooners are not relying solely on Young. They relied on Hield in 2015-16, and we saw how that turned out. Now, I will give it to Oklahoma. They were a Final Four team. But when you get dropped by 44 points in the Final Four, the fact that you were a Final Four team gets a little watered down. Now, get this. Buddy Hield, Oklahoma's star player from 2015-16, with a season average of 25 points a game, didn't even score in the double digits. He only had 9 points, which goes to prove that relying on one player to win games is never a good idea. And that's exactly what's happening this year for the Sooners. So let's take a look at some of the other teams this year. Virginia, the number one team in the country's leading scorer is Kyle Guy with 14.5 points. He's followed up by Devin Hall and Ty Jerome with 11.8 and 10.1 points a game, respectively. And I should also make mention that every member of the Cavaliers has a number in the average points per game stat line, meaning everyone on the team has gotten at least a basket this year. Now, let's look at Villanova. Jalen Brunson's currently averaging 19.3 points a game. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but he's also followed by McCall Bridges, who is averaging 17.2, and Dante DiVincenzo, who is averaging 14 points a game. So they're there to essentially carry some of the weight. Now, one more. Let's look at Purdue. Carson Edwards is averaging 18.2 points a game. He's followed by Vincent Edwards with 14.7 and Isaac Haas with 14.6. Now, what all three of these schools have in common? Well, for one, they have balanced out stat lines, which keeps the weight and pressure of winning a game off of one player's shoulders. Oh, yeah, and all three of these teams are in the top 10 with no more than 5 losses. So obviously they're doing something right. Now, let's look at some of the games Oklahoma has lost this season. On their February 19th meeting with Kansas, they lost 104-74. Now, don't get me wrong. I've heard, now I can't say this from experience, but I've heard that playing at Kansas is a difficult task. But a team like Oklahoma, who was essentially invincible to start the season, losing by 30 points in any setting is inexcusable. Now, Trae Young in this game only had 11 points, 17 points shy of his season average of 28. Oklahoma's also lost to West Virginia twice this season. In both games, Trae Young topped his season average with 29 and 32 points, respectively. So if Young is scoring such high numbers, why is Oklahoma losing? It's because he's the only one doing anything. In the West Virginia game where Young had 29 points, he was followed up with a 12-point performance by Jamuni McNeese. In the West Virginia game where Young scored 32, he was followed up with 12 points by Brady Manick. I'm not saying this to imply that other players don't contribute. I'm just saying when you have players shooting in the high 20s to low 30s and the highest score after that is 12, it's not going to cut it. And the Sooners are figuring that out currently because the trip to the NCAA tournament that they thought was automatic early on in the season is now in jeopardy. And considering it's so late in the season, I don't necessarily know if there's anything the Sooners can do at this point to really fix it. The only thing I could think of is to give some of the other shooters on the team some more touches. I don't know if that would work, but it's the only thing that could, in theory, sort of ease the issue. Oklahoma has gone a majority of the season depending on Trae Young. So, unfortunately, it may be too late to get some of the team's other high scorers like James and Manick into a groove of shooting more. But yeah, guys, that is all I've got on the Oklahoma issue. And we are out of time for today. So I want to thank you all for listening. It means the world to me, guys. Everyone who stayed till the end, thank you so much. And for my YouTube listeners, if you like the podcast, be sure to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. For my SoundCloud listeners, yes, you heard that right. I am now uploading my podcast to SoundCloud. Be sure to give me a follow. But yeah, that does it for this podcast, guys. Thank you so much for listening, and have a good one.